several spine surgeons told me that if I didn't get surgery on my spine, I was going to be paralyzed for life. At least 3 or 4 surgeons agreed that it was the spinal stenosis causing my neuropathy. I had 3 or 4 other surgeons that disagreed and said, no. You have spinal stenosis, but it's not that bad, and it's in your neck, and that's not going to affect your feet. I wasn't going to let surgery be my first solution. After about 3 years of not finding any answers, out of desperation, I finally called the surgeon in Fort Lauderdale, the most respectable, responsible, and highly rated surgeon in this industry. And I said, let's do it. They did a cervical laminoplasty, so they opened up the vertebrae and created more space for my nerve canal. Has it helped? I don't know. I don't think so. In fact, I now have neck pain where I never had neck pain before. My pain was everywhere else. Now I have pain in my neck as well.
Hi, I'm Dr. Josef. It's my pleasure to welcome Tim today. Tim has had a benzodiazepine injury that's really had a huge impact on his life. He's kindly agreed to come on and share what he's lost and, what's happened to him. So, Tim, thank you so much for coming on. I think the best place to start before we really unpack everything that happened to you, I would say, is how did you end up on benzos in the first place? What was that story?
I've asked myself that question many times, and because that was a defining moment in my life that I didn't realize was happening at the time. I mean, it was defining in other ways. I ended up on benzos in 2004. If you remember, you're probably old enough to remember the Asian tsunami. I was in Thailand when the tsunami hit. I was actually on holiday. I landed in Thailand the day before the tsunami. Or I should say I landed on a very small island in Thailand the day before the tsunami. And we woke up the next morning underwater. I was being, pushed through a bungalow and out the back into a forest of trees where I managed to climb a tree and survive. But I think 80 or 85% of the people on the island died that day.
Oh my God.
And that was, it was a very defining moment in my life. And it really taught me a lot about myself as a person, because I didn't feel as uncomfortable as I thought I would in a situation like that. I was actually able to partake in the search and rescue, and it kind of gave me it gave me a little bit of meaning in my life that I hadn't really had before. And I've been working as a documentarian, as an animal rescuer for a long time, but I didn't have a sense of purpose when it came to that level of, let's say, search and rescue or first response that I developed that particular day, just in the minutes after the tsunami. And so the next few days were very defining in my life because we were stuck on this island. I had to learn how to rescue people, how to care for people, how to stitch people up, all these things that I learned on the fly and became quite good at it. But one thing I wasn't good at was sleeping. I don't think anybody was very good at sleeping after the tsunami. We were constantly thinking, you're constantly in your head worried about the next wave that's coming because we didn't know what was happening. We were on an island. We had no communication. We didn't even hear the word tsunami for days or maybe a week. So we were paranoid about this wave coming back and coming back and coming back. And I had met a guy on the island who, after like 3 days, he was like, you need to sleep. And he gave me an Ambien. And he said, don't worry, it's non-addictive. Big mistake. But it worked. It knocked me out. And I asked for another one the next day and the next day. And I didn't think I was, going down this path where I was becoming addicted. I never would have dawned on me. I was just like, look, this is a rough situation. You're sleeping outside with the mosquitoes and heat. You need an Ambien to sleep. It's no big deal. And that's where it all started. Yeah.
Yeah. So walk me forward from then, like just hit the high points. Tell me the story from then up until when the journey off these medications started, when you realized it was a problem and it was probably time to come off. What's that story?
Yeah, as you can imagine, that was a 2 decades journey. We're now 2 decades since the tsunami. Mm-hmm. So the journey from there was I immediately, when I got to the mainland, I immediately got a prescription for Ambien. And I was taking those for, I would say regularly. I just started taking them regularly without really thinking much of it for probably several years. Now, the interesting thing about Thailand, I was living in Thailand. I should walk that back. I had gone back to the United States, and I was working in my teaching career in the United States. But meanwhile, I was planning on moving back to Asia and working on a documentary about the tsunami and the rebirth of Thailand after the tsunami. So I was kind of in this position, I was in Miami working on my degree, teaching at a university, and I was still having trouble sleeping. So I had gone, and I think the doctors in Miami, if I remember correctly, they didn't like the fact that I was taking Ambien. They thought it was a very highly addictive, troublesome drug. And I said, I argued with them. I said, no, I understand it's not addictive. So they wanted to put me on something much safer, Klonopin. And yeah, exactly. Who would have guessed? I knew nothing about these drugs. I was trusting these guys. So they put me on Klonopin, and I was taking Klonopin for sleep. Now, this was always for insomnia, never for anxiety or anything like that. The anxiety would come much later. I never had problems with anxiety before, which I do now. So, I was taking the Klonopin regularly. I didn't think it was much. They told me it was a very low dose. I think it was 1 milligram. I find out later that 1 milligram is actually a pretty high dose. So I was taking that for several years. And then when I got back to Thailand to work on documentary stuff, I was really excited to find out that I could buy Ambien, Klonopin, Valium, Xanax, all these other drugs I had recently learned about. I could buy them right over the counter. I didn't have to go through a doctor anymore. Mm-hmm. So doctors had already prescribed me the Klonopin. I think I had a prescription for Ambien at the time as well, but now I could buy them right over the counter and not have to worry about dealing with the doctors. So I was now approaching self-medication at that point. And I thought I was being smart. I was like, well, I don't want to get addicted to any one of these drugs, so I'll just rotate. I'll take Ambien for a week, and I'll switch over to Klonopin for a week, and then I'll switch over to Valium for a week. And I didn't do any. Me, a documentary filmmaker who's used to doing research, never researched any of these drugs, like an idiot. I don't know what I was thinking. So there's a lot of anger and hostility towards myself for letting myself fall down into this rabbit hole. But so I was, in essence, I think what I was doing was Kindling. You know what Kindling is. I don't know if your audience knows what Kindling is. Maybe you can explain it better than me, but I understand.
Just go for it. Yeah.
You're kind of going up and down in waves, or you're taking the drug one day and not taking it the next day, or taking it as needed. It even said on the bottle of Klonopin, take as needed for sleep. And so as needed when it comes to Klonopin is really, you're prescribing someone to Kindle. You're prescribing them to take it, 3 days, take it, then don't take it for 3 or 4 days. And that's kind of my understanding, that you're on this roller coaster ride.
I think that's pretty good. I guess I might add to that, like it's kind of this compounded injury, actually, that happens as you go on and off the drug, kind of put yourself into withdrawal, get back on the drug, and that over time it can be damaging to the nervous system, and then people start to have a harder time with withdrawal after that. They develop ongoing withdrawal symptoms, and then sometimes even they start having adverse reactions to medicines that they've previously tolerated at the dose because they've just kind of upset things. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And I believe that I was probably having or developing interdose withdrawals that I didn't understand because I knew nothing about half-lives. All this stuff I learned about these drugs, unfortunately, was a little bit, too little, too late. The half-life of Xanax, as you know, is extremely short. The half-life of Ambien and the other Z drugs is extremely short. I never even put them in the same bucket. I just thought they both helped sleeping, but I didn't realize they were very similar. Actually, maybe you could explain how are Ambien and Xanax similar, and how are they different? Because I understand they act like the Z drugs act like benzodiazepines, but they're not. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I mean, in general, I think they're the same. They tried, there's a lot of, I think, marketing material out there that tries to make them seem like they're different. They act exactly in the same way on the same receptors. And the main difference between them is maybe Ambien's a little shorter acting than Xanax, but they cause exactly the same problems. They make people feel the same way. Maybe Ambien causes a little bit more of the sleepwalking stuff, which happens when the drug is shorter acting and more potent. But pharmacologically, they're very similar.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
I started coming to a point where I was mixing the drugs because the Ambien, I found I wouldn't get a solid sleep. It would knock me out really well, but I would wake up 4 hours later.
Yep.
But if I took an Ambien and a Valium, that became the perfect concoction. The Ambien would knock me out, the Valium would keep me down, and I would wake up feeling pretty good, maybe groggy, but I would snap out of that pretty quickly. I became functional mixing the two drugs, mixing the Ambien and the Valium. Now, at the time, I wasn't realizing that if I took a Xanax instead of, I realized the Xanax was much stronger than Valium. I could tell when I took it, but I didn't realize the short half-life and how that would affect me the next day. So I think I was developing, without realizing it, I was developing interdose withdrawals. So if I would take an Ambien at night and a quarter of a Xanax was all I really needed, 0.25 milligrams of Xanax and 10 milligrams of Ambien, or maybe even half an Ambien, 5 milligrams of Ambien. I took that at night before bed. I would sleep. I wouldn't notice till later that it wasn't a real sleep. I wasn't dreaming. Years later, I was starting to realize that I wasn't dreaming properly. I was getting more of a hypnotic sleep and instead of a proper sleep. And maybe you can explain the difference there too, actually. The difference between the sleep you'll get on Ambien or Xanax compared to, a very natural sleep. I think they're very different. And I've noticed the difference since I've been tapering off. My dreams have been coming back. My sleep is much deeper and I wake up. I don't necessarily wake up more refreshed. That's a whole different story. But is there a big difference between the type of sleep you'll get on these drugs as opposed to a natural sleep?
I think what you just described is what I've heard. It's not a natural sleep. It's disruptive to the REM cycle and the natural sleep architecture that you have when you take these meds long term. And anecdotally, what people do report is that maybe they do help with sleep somewhat at the start, but eventually they don't. And people, when they come off, feel more rejuvenated just with the natural sleep that they're having. They don't feel groggy and kind of hungover in the morning. They feel better, well rested. And so they report all of the things that you were kind of hinting at. I know your issue is a little more complicated because you've got some nervous system injury as well. Mm-hmm. But I would imagine that once that resolves, that you would have much more restful, natural sleep.
Right. Yeah, the one thing I noticed over the years, and I just figured it was kind of a side effect of the drug. That was not necessarily something to worry about. Was the fact that I wasn't dreaming anymore. I wasn't remembering my dreams anymore. Mm-hmm. And, now I'm looking at some of the anecdotal evidence in the books that I've read and in the Ashton manual that, of course, I discovered recently that the lack of dreaming or the lack of memory of your dreams, all that can be very induced by the benzos. And actually, even the protracted withdrawals, it can happen for, months and even years afterwards, from what I understand. But luckily, since I started my taper, I'm starting to dream much, much more heavily. And I'm remembering things from decades ago that I had forgotten, which is interesting. So this whole, issue with memory loss with Ambien and, the Z drugs and benzodiazepines, I think there's a lot of truth to that a lot of our memories get suppressed as maybe the brain is not functioning properly. And then all of a sudden, the brain is starting to wake up and all these memories are coming out in my dreams, which is really interesting, actually.
That is, yeah. That is interesting. I have heard about people, especially heavier benzodiazepine users. You'll have a situation where you have an unmedicated spouse and then a medicated spouse, and then they've lived through the same things, side by side for decades, and then someone comes off the medication, and then the other unmedicated spouse is just astounded how little the other person remembers, because huge things that have happened in their life, in their children's lives, because there's something about ongoing benzodiazepine use that's really disruptive to memory consolidation. So people will say, I just feel like I can't remember decades of my life, and that's really common.
I know that feeling very well. Luckily, a lot of my life has been documented because that's what I do as a documentarian. But I have my friends and family get frustrated with me because I don't remember discussions we had the day before. I won't remember what we had for dinner the day before. I still have problems, although it seems like it's getting better slowly. Memory was one of the first things that I started developing memory loss. I started thinking that maybe there's something. Maybe it's related to the drugs that I'm taking, but each time I tried to come off of them, it was just a nightmare. I would rather deal with the memory loss than deal with trying to come off. And when I say nightmare, it was really the insomnia. Not being able to sleep for 2 or 3 days straight is pure hell.
Let's go there now. So, at what point did you realize? At what point did you start thinking like, "Hey, maybe I should come off"? What was it at that time that got you thinking in that way?
It was actually desperation. It was a moment of desperation, and this is 20 years into regular use, taking them as needed, switching from one to the other, or combining 2 of them. Literally 20 years, almost to the day. When it was more than 20 years, because I was actually in March of 2020, I was noticing some neurological problems, specifically with my feet and my toes. I was noticing a tingling sensation, things that I had noticed before years earlier, but they were very mild. And I actually had my very first panic attack in early 2024, just before COVID. I was walking through the streets, and I was living in Taiwan at the time. And I was walking through the streets of Taipei, which is a very busy city. It's like New York City. It's a lot of activity, a lot of sirens, and the noise when I walked out of the house was just overwhelming. And the noise and the light, the jackhammers, the sirens, the motorbikes, the sunlight. And I started kind of hyperventilating. I felt like my heart was jumping through my chest. And I kind of ran back in the house, and I sat down in the corner, and I just turned the lights out, and I stayed in the dark. And I thought about a character from a TV show that I would watch a lot. I don't know if you've seen the TV show Shameless.
Haven't, yeah.
It's about a very dysfunctional family in Chicago. And there was a character, Joan Cusack plays a character in Shameless that has extreme agoraphobia. And I immediately thought of her. And I used to watch that show and think how crazy she was. And I'd been sitting on the couch going, wow, I've turned into the character, Joan Cusack's character in this TV show. And I'm thinking, well, maybe she's not crazy. Maybe there's something else going on in there. Because this was my very first panic attack. Now, I didn't think much of it. I didn't realize what it could have been the result of. I didn't understand it at the time. And it wasn't severe enough for me to, check into a hospital or anything like that. So it went away in an hour, and I just, went on with my day. And then jumping ahead a little bit to when I realized I needed to come off was after spending 3 years trying to figure out what my neurological problem was. I mean, I literally spent from March of 2020 until August 2023 trying to get to the bottom of my neurological, the shaking in my hands, and the muscle fasciculations and my twitches in my shoulder that were really bad. I developed all these neurological sensations, these burning sensations in my calves and my shins. All the hair fell off my knees for some reason. I was having pain in my feet, in the bottom of my feet. When I walked across the floor in my bare feet, it felt like I was being electrocuted. I've heard other people mention this, and it's really hard to explain. Because my instability in my walking became very, very poor because I felt like I was walking on a quilt, an electrified quilt. And I know that doesn't make sense to many people. It's like you're walking on cushions. So you're unstable, you're kind of walking like this. It's very unstable trying to maintain stability as you're walking. But at the same time, you don't want to put too much pressure because there's this electricity shooting through the bottom of your feet and running up my body every step I take. So I would take one step forward and the electricity would shoot up my legs, into my neck, into my brain, and I would get these brain zaps. And this was happening. This was it was happening constantly to the point where I was bedridden for almost, I would say more than 6 months. I was walking with a cane. I had become this feeble little old man walking around. Just 6 months earlier, I was running down a flight of stairs, skipping every third step. And now I'm walking down a flight of stairs with a cane in one hand and holding the railing or the banister in the other hand. And I just couldn't, I was desperate to figure out what was going on. And I went down so many rabbit holes, and so many friends led me down rabbit holes, and doctors led me down rabbit holes. I started seeing specialists. I started out with neurologists, and neurologists did all kinds of tests, from the EMGs, nerve conduction studies. They did brain scans. I had MRIs done. I had lumbar punctures done. I actually had 2 lumbar punctures done because I thought I had MS. One neurologist, one of the top neurologists at NTU Hospital in Taiwan, told me he thought, in his opinion, I had ALS and that I should go home and be with my family because I probably only have a few years left. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I thought, I said, no way, you're an idiot. I walked out of there and I never looked back. But it did scare me because there's really no diagnosis for ALS. ALS is something you tell people they have when everything else is written off, basically. And at that point, we did pretty much extinguish every other idea. I did tests, very, very intense tests for Lyme disease. I ran the gamut of blood tests. I was getting full blood examinations every couple of months and comparing them and having specialists and hematologists and endocrinologists. And, I had a cardiologist looking at my heart because I didn't understand the heart palpitations and I would walk my dog and suddenly my heart was racing through my chest. And these were things that should not increase your heart rate. But yet my heart rate, my blood pressure were all fine. So it didn't really make a whole lot of sense. At one point, I checked myself into an emergency room. And this was when I was back in the States. I'd given up on the doctors when I was living in Taiwan. I was in Taiwan for 9 years. This was after Thailand. So I was in Asia for 17 years. I'd completely given up on the specialists in Taiwan. I thought they were all quacks. They wanted to prescribe me more and more benzos, actually. They wanted to increase my dose of benzos. They're like, oh, well, you're only taking a very small amount. Maybe you should increase, and that'll help you calm down, and it'll calm your nerves and your legs and your this and that. So I was, essentially, I was increasing my dosage when I should have been decreasing. And, but I was still looking for answers, and I was looking for solutions. So I was trying all these different therapies. I was going to functional doctors thinking, okay, the traditional doctors weren't able to help me. I'm going to have to go the functional medicine route. And I was kind of glad I did, but at the same time, they were leading me down other rabbit holes. I even went to functional doctors that specialized in neuropathy, and they led me towards all these different supplements and things that they thought I should be taking, and red light therapy on my legs and my feet. And I did chelation therapy because I got tested for heavy metals. My wife, actually, I should mention, she's been amazing through all this. We got married literally just months before all this started coming to a head. So she married a guy who she knew to be very active. We'd go hiking 3 days a week. We'd be on our bicycles constantly. We never drove anywhere. We rode our bikes all over Taiwan, or all over the city, I should say. And we went on, trekking trips in Asia. She knew me as the guy that went trekking across Nepal and across northern India. And all of a sudden, I've turned into this feeble old man looking for answers to what I thought was some sort of debilitating illness that was killing me. Meanwhile, I was losing weight. I was losing muscle. So I started seeing doctors about my muscle wasting. Of course, they wanted to test me over and over again for HIV. And as most of, I think, your other guests and clients can probably attest to this, we get desperate for answers. And I spent $120,000 searching for answers and solutions. And not a single doctor until August of 2023 mentioned the benzodiazepine use, although it was in my records of, as drugs that I was taking, the Ambien and the benzos. And I even did stem cell therapy. I went to one of the best stem cell clinics in Mexico, the very, very top notch. Spent tens of thousands of dollars on stem cells. I spent thousands of dollars on exosomes and vitamin IV drips. And I mentioned the chelation therapy because I tested positive for heavy metals. I thought, okay, well, let's get the heavy metals out of the system. And so I went through this very expensive chelation therapy program. And, I was getting IV drips every week of different vitamins and minerals and this and that. And I think I did have some mineral deficiencies. I think that benzos can cause certain mineral deficiencies, maybe vitamin D and some others. I'm not 100% on that. But it wasn't until, fast forward 3 years of this search into August of just last year, August 2023, when I was about back to that act of desperation. I literally was feeling like I was at the end of my rope, and I was starting to have these incredible panic attacks out of what I thought they were coming out of the blue. And I was having one such attack in Princeton, New Jersey, and I was at the house, and I remember I was pacing around the room, and the pacing was so painful because of the electricity shooting through my body, and I was having these zaps and these twitches. My arm was twitching out, my shoulder wouldn't stop. In fact, it even cramped up at one time. My shoulder and my neck kind of seized up like this for a while, and I was kind of walking around the house like this, rocking. And I couldn't, I couldn't uncramp my shoulder. I couldn't uncramp my toes. My toes were cramped up like this, and I couldn't straighten them out. And the pain is indescribable. All I can say is the headaches, and I've had headaches. I've had migraines in my life. I've been prone to headaches even when I was younger. But the headaches from what I would call intradose withdrawal, which is what I think was happening in hindsight, because I was taking Xanax at the time and the Ambien together, and that would leave me a big, wave or big window where they would be out of my system in the morning, and then I would not take them until the next night. So I was having this big kind of intradose withdrawal window, I think. And that pain, that headache pain, it's like shoving your head in a wood chipper. Literally, it's searing. And at the same time, there's this tinnitus that I know a lot of people talk about, which is very real and it's very intense. It's like a jet engine is running in your head. And it is the most excruciating combination of your head being pushed through a wood chipper while you're sitting inside this jet engine. I have come up with some hacks for the tinnitus, by the way, we can talk about. But that day, I was actually in the backyard looking up at the trees, sizing up the trees, trying to decide which tree would be the best one to hang myself in, and how long the rope would be, and it was if I had enough rope in the garage. And if not, what is the backup plan? I knew there was a gun shop down the road that I was scoping out already. So I was actually contemplating suicide. And this is something that I hadn't thought about since I was a kid. I think when I was in my teen angst, when you have the kind of suicidal ideations now and then. And it wasn't because I wanted to die. I mean, anyone who knows me knows that I have passion for life and adventure and exploration. I mean, that's what I've been doing for the last 30, 40 years. But I wanted the pain to end. And I thought at this point, that was the only logical way, was suicide. It wasn't coming from the fact that I wanted my life to end. It was I wanted the pain to stop. I just wanted the noise to stop, the noise in my legs, the neuropathy in my legs, the tingling that goes on. It's almost like when your legs fall asleep and you get that tingling feeling. Well, my legs have been asleep now for 3 years. So it's a constant tingling, which makes it difficult to walk. And then, of course, it comes with that electrical pain that goes right up into your head. And it's definitely the hardest and most excruciating pain I've ever experienced. And I've broken several limbs and I've sprained things. And, it's rough. So I ended up calling a therapist.
I was going to say, when this was going on and you were feeling suicidal, I'm thinking about, so you married a few years earlier, in great health, and now you're, like you said, debilitated. Someone tells you have ALS, things aren't getting better. How did you feel about the impact that this was having on your wife's life and your marriage?
I mean, she could attest to that if you want to get on camera, but I told her several times, I'm like, you didn't sign up for this. You should just leave me. You're still young and vibrant and healthy. You have no business, being married to a 90-year-old guy. And, some of your viewers are going to look at me and say, you don't look 90 and you look fine. And, right now I'm forcing myself to look fine on camera because I'm on camera, and I had to force myself to get up and do this interview when I would have much rather just laid horizontal, which is the place where I feel most comfortable nowadays, which is horrible because I never used to lie around the house. Lethargic is the word that comes to mind. I've become quite lethargic in the last couple of years. But back to my wife, she's been the most amazing support person I can imagine to have. And I really feel for people out there that are going through this without support. She doesn't really question it. She understands. I shouldn't say she understands. She understands that what I'm going through is very real. She doesn't necessarily understand what the pain feels like because no one does unless they're going through it. It's really difficult to imagine the kind of physical and mental pain. But I thought for so many times, I thought about, I got to transfer all my accounts to my wife's name because I'm ready to check out. And I want to make sure she's set when I leave. I want to make sure she has a good financial stability when I go so she can have a nice life. And so I was thinking through all of this very, very logically and methodically. Meanwhile, I was trying to figure out the best way to kill myself. And I thought it was just logical. And I don't know if it was the drug talking or if it was me talking. I really, to this point in time, I really don't understand what was the thoughts that were coming from the drug or drug-induced thoughts or me trying to cope with the drug. I'm not sure. But that day when I was having this breakdown in New Jersey and I was banging my head on the table, I was banging my hands, my fists on the table, I was having these fits of rage. So I would go back and forth between being kind of comfortably numb, like that old Pink Floyd song, comfortably numb to rageful and verbally violent. And this, I know it happens before in the past, and I never really associated with the benzos. But now I can say it's definitely associated with the benzos because it got progressively worse. I would be super loving with my wife one minute, and I'd be screaming out the window the next. And it was becoming, very psychotic. And I think anybody who didn't know me and saw me that way would think that he is definitely mentally disturbed. There's something wrong with that guy. He's bipolar, or something really strange is going on with him. At that same point, I think the day before I called the therapist when I was, contemplating suicide, my wife and I had gone into town to see some live music. And we were just in the park in town watching live music. I couldn't handle it. I was standing next to two police officers, and I was petrified the police officers could see through my facade, and I was going to get arrested. Arrested for what? I don't know. I was paranoid that these guys would see that there was something wrong with me, and I needed to be locked up. And I couldn't enjoy the music. I couldn't enjoy the dogs that were around me. And I'm a dog lover. I love playing with animals. There were animals and kids there and families. And normally that would be an amazing environment that I would want to be in. Great music, great people. And all I could think was, I got to get home. I want to be back in the house. I want to be back in that hammock in the back of the house where I feel safe. That was my safe spot, the hammock. And maybe it was the way the hammock kind of hugs you and you rock back and forth, but that was my safe zone. And so I developed agoraphobia in a really big way. I never understood why. It just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And I, out of desperation, because I was having these suicidal thoughts, I said, I need to call a therapist. I haven't talked to a therapist in decades. And I'm like, I think I need to talk to a therapist. So I didn't want to call a psychiatrist yet because I didn't want them to change up my meds or put me on meds. I probably should have called a psychiatrist, actually, but I called a therapist. She got me in right away. And she probably saved my life. She was the first person to question the benzos, but in a different way. It was interesting because I was telling her my story, and I told her I was detoxing in Mexico just a few months earlier. I had a job in Mexico. I was working on some investigations in Mexico. And I found myself
detoxing. What does that mean?
Yes, I'll explain that in just a sec.
Yeah.
I was in Mexico working, and I was walking around my apartment in Mexico, and I realized I was looking around, and I saw in every single room, and in every bag, and in my car there were drugs. And at this point, I was on benzos, I was on gabapentin, I was on pregabalin, I was on Lyrica, Duloxetine. They had me on other stuff too, other psychotic drugs at this point as well. And I even went to the doctor and said, listen, I'm having a problem with the gabapentin and pregabalin. They're making me tired. So I went to a doctor in Mexico, and he said, because I was having trouble staying awake driving my car every morning to work. I had an hour drive. And he said, oh, well, we'll just put you on Ritalin. Well, in the morning, you can take the Ritalin, and that'll get you to work. You'll be fine. You won't fall asleep when you're driving. So now I'm taking Ritalin to stay awake. And I'm taking the Z drugs and the benzos at night to relax and go to sleep. And I was a complete disaster. I was a wreck. And that's when I was looking around the house, and I said, I'm a drug addict. It was the first time I remember admitting to myself, and my wife wasn't with me. I was working alone at the time in Mexico. It was over Christmas. So here I was in Mexico alone for Christmas, and I decided I was going to get off the drugs, all of it. And I was working with a local doctor. He was a chiropractor, but he also understood a lot of like homeopathy. So I was working with him a little bit, and so he helped me get off. Well, I say he helped me. He kind of advised me to slowly get off all these drugs. And I managed to detox off of everything in a course of a month. Everything except the benzo. I was still taking clonazepam, but that was a really harsh detox. I stopped everything cold turkey, and I was basically in bed, freezing and sweating and puking for a good 30 days over the holidays in 2022. And that was my first attempt at detoxing and getting clean of all these pharmaceuticals I was taking. And it was hell. In hindsight, it was nothing compared to the hell of getting off the benzo, but it was hell in the fact that it was just, I was very suicidal. My mind was starting to really instill these thoughts of, you're a loser, you're horrible, you should never have married this woman, she's suffering because of you. And I was a lot of this stuff was coming in, these racing thoughts that I hadn't had before. And this was all happening in this detox, trying to quit cold turkey. I was quitting everything cold turkey. And I had ended up calling, I called someone in the States, the American, I don't know if it's the American Detox Association, something like that. Okay. I ended up calling them a detox facility. And this guy on the phone was able to kind of talk me through what was happening. And he was a former heroin addict. And I felt like, okay, he is understanding what I'm going through. I was in bed, freezing and sweating at the same time. And he was talking me through it all and basically letting me know there was a place back in New Jersey I could go to if I needed to detox. Now, I'm glad I didn't go there because I know rapid detoxing off of benzos is very dangerous. I know that now. But it was nice to know that there was some place to go that my insurance would cover and that he understood what I was going through. And he kept in touch with me every day. He called me every morning to make sure I was still alive and I didn't do anything stupid or anything permanent. And, but that was my first attempt at detoxing from any of this stuff. And I managed to get everything out of my system except for the benzo. I kept taking the Klonopin, and even my chiropractor that I was working with in Mexico, he felt it. He's like, okay, well, you're off of everything except the Klonopin. If you need to take the Klonopin to sleep at night, it's probably not a really bad thing. And you can worry about that a little bit later. Well, little did we both know that was probably the worst of the drug that I was taking. And that was the one that was going to be the hardest to get off of eventually. So fast forward again, and back in New Jersey, my wife's handing me cards to read. She's handing me notes.
God bless her. Yeah.
She wants me to go back and talk about the therapist. Okay. Yeah, she's right. That's where I was going back to. The therapist I met in New Jersey, she invited me in, and she listened to my story. And this is where the Mexican part of the story comes in. She said, wait a minute, back up. Tell me about what happened in Mexico again. And I told her about the detox and this and that. And she said, no, you mentioned something about the drugs. She told me you were buying these drugs over the counter in Mexico. I said, yeah. I said, you don't need a prescription for them in Mexico. And I knew what I needed because all the doctors had prescribed them in the States and in Asia. So I knew what I needed. I just buy them over the counter. And she said, wow, you should really, I saw a documentary recently about counterfeit drugs in Mexico, counterfeit pharmaceuticals in Mexico. You should really watch this documentary. And I looked it up, and it scared the crap out of me. The drugs that they were selling in the pharmacies in Mexico were primarily, a lot of them were counterfeit drugs, and they were cut with all kinds of crazy stuff from, chalk. I mean, all kinds of them. And this is stuff that was being sold in legitimate pharmacies all over the country. That scared the daylights out of me. So I immediately wanted to get off of the drugs I was taking, the benzos I was taking, and take something that I could get in the States prescribed that I knew was a proper drug that was not necessarily counterfeit or cut with substances that could be healing my nervous system. I assumed it was the corrupt pharmaceuticals I was getting that was actually destroying my nervous system and not necessarily the drug itself. But she brought me down a path that would lead me forward. And so yeah, I got really paranoid about the drugs I was taking, and I tried to get off of them. So I talked to a psychiatrist in New Jersey about my situation. I said, listen, I'm taking these drugs I got from pharmacies in Mexico that might not be legit. And he said, well, I need you to go and you need to surrender all those drugs at a pharmacy and document it. And then I'll prescribe you, So I did. I dumped all the drugs at a pharmacy and I documented and I kept a little bit of them just in case, like emergency, because when you're in that frame of mind, you don't want to let go of what could possibly be saving you. You feel like it's saving your life. It's saving you from insomnia, it's saving you from all these horrible effects. So I kept a little pack of Xanax with me. I still have it, actually. I haven't gotten the nerve to throw it away yet. But and I called this doctor back, and he suddenly decided he wasn't going to help. He wasn't going to prescribe me. And now I'm like out of my mind, like, oh, now what do I do? This guy just told me to throw everything away, and now he's leaving me high and dry. He basically forced me to cold turkey. And I called the office, and they were like, no, we're sorry, he can't work with you anymore because you're not going to be staying in New Jersey. You're going back to Pennsylvania. And I'm like, Pennsylvania's only 5 minutes away. I don't understand. What's the difference? And that led me down a whole nother journey of trying to get prescriptions filled, interstate prescriptions, as I think you and I spoke about in the beginning of when I met you. I was actually in Baltimore on a project in Baltimore. So here I was in Maryland, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, trying to get prescriptions filled from a Pennsylvania doctor with a New Jersey ID, and I was having a lot of trouble. I even got to the point where I couldn't get a prescription filled in from a different doctor, a psychiatrist who was willing to work with me, that I found later. I spent a lot of desperate times trying to find a doctor who would work with me. And when I did, he was able to prescribe me, but I had to run down for a project in Baltimore. I was trying to work, even though I was pretty much disabled. I was fighting with disability at the same time. It's a whole long story there. But he was willing to work with me, but we couldn't get the prescription filled in Baltimore. I actually had to drive all the way back to Pennsylvania just to get the prescription filled. And I was only able to get 2-week prescriptions, so I'd have to drive back to Pennsylvania every time I wanted to get the prescription filled.
Oh, man.
So that became a little bit of, and that became problematic because the doctor that had decided he wasn't going to work with me, they gave me this horrible advice. They said, well, just go to one of the urgent cares. Urgent care will take care of you. I went to urgent care, and they're like, we can't help you. I went to urgent care in Maryland. They're like, what are you talking about? We can't help you. You need to get your prescription filled by your doctor in your state. And I told them what was going on, and they're like, hey, after 15 minutes in their office, they're like, no, sir, you have to leave. In fact, one woman actually, she said she was going to call the police if I didn't leave because I was arguing with her. I just wanted to get a 2-week prescription filled. And she was like, sir, we're going to call the police. They sent me to, from urgent care, I went to 2 or 3 different urgent cares. Then they sent me to the emergency room. They said, just go to the emergency room. I went to the emergency room in Baltimore, and I just saw, there's 75 people in there, and I saw this line at the counter, and I'm like, no way, I can't do this. So I went back to the house, and I went through my bag, and I found, my little stash of Klonopin, and I broke one into like 4 pieces, and I took the Klonopin, and all of a sudden things started to mellow out. I started to feel okay. But this was after, going, I think, 2 days without the Klonopin. So I was experiencing that intradose withdrawal. And the first time I experienced that intradose withdrawal was back in New Jersey, just before I went to go see that therapist who had pointed me down the direction of the pharmaceutical, counterfeit pharmaceutical drugs. And I'm not sure where I started talking in circles.
I think I'm glad that you went into that story that the challenges you had with the pharmacy, because that's a really common way people end up getting railroaded into the detoxes. They can't find anyone who will work with them. And then so they end up, either cold turkey at home, or they go, I guess I have to go to the detox. And
you start to feel like a drug addict. Yeah. I felt like a drug, like I was searching around town for a fix, and I wanted to be fixed. I did. And now I understand where the word fix comes from, but I just wanted a couple pills to get me through the night so I could sleep. And I didn't have all this crazy anxiety and this electrical pain going on. And I really started to feel at 1 o'clock in the morning, I'm in an emergency room and I just want a couple of pills. I'm like, wow, I am really feeling like an addict.
So the thing I want to ask you is, there's always this moment, it sounds like we're building up to it, where things are kind of coming together. Maybe it's got something to do with the benzo. Maybe there's some counterfeit parts in there that are bad, or maybe it's the drug itself. When did you kind of stumble down the rabbit hole and find benzo buddies and start piecing together that, there was a common denominator for these years of problems that you were having? When did that moment happen for you? What led you to that moment?
It was that particular therapist who ended up leaving that job, by the way, like a couple weeks later. So I never was able to stay in touch with her. But I started going down this documentary rabbit hole. I love documentaries. I'm a documentary filmmaker. So I found Lisa Ling's documentary on CNN. And she did a pretty good coverage on benzodiazepines. And I think her father was actually hooked on benzodiazepines. And that was one documentary that opened my eyes. I'm like, wow, okay, this is actually a problem. And I'm feeling a lot of what these people are going through. And I think I watched 4 or 5 documentaries. And then I don't exactly remember how I ended up there, but I ended up on the Benzodiazepine Coalition information website. And that is just such an amazing resource. I mean, you just go to the resources page, and it took me, and of course it's a very dark rabbit hole that you go into, but it pointed me to several books. And of course, the first book on the list was the Ashton Manual. And I think that's one of the first things people find when they find themselves waking up to the fact that they have a problem. And I was literally waking up, so I have an actual problem, and I can't deny this anymore. And when I read the Ashton Manual, luckily it's a short read because I wasn't able to read much. I wasn't able to retain much information. I was having memory problems. I was having focus problems. I couldn't really text and write much anymore. I couldn't write in my journal anymore because I was having problems with my fingers at that point. My fingers were tingling and numb, and I couldn't control them properly. But I found that I was able to read this particular issue, and this was after I'd been through all kinds of other books on everything from Lyme disease to CIDP and peripheral neuropathy, several books on peripheral neuropathy. I found that the Ashton Manual made sense. It all started coming together. I'm like, this is what's happening to me. And I talked to a couple of friends about it. They're like, oh, yeah, you've been saying that for years. You've been saying this is what you have, and this is what you have. And now it's this Ashton Manual. That's what you have. But this was the time that I realized, okay, I can connect and resonate with this story and these symptoms and these byproducts, and also the other anecdotal evidence coming from other people. Because as soon as I found the Ashton Manual, of course, one of the next things I found was benzo buddies, the benzodiazepine help groups in Facebook, which are a blessing in some respects. I know some people say that they're a very dark place to go, but I think if you spend too much time there, they can be. But I think in the beginning, that Facebook help group really helps validate that, okay, I'm not the only one. There are hundreds, if not thousands of people going through this as well. And these are very dark and painful stories that I'm reading, but they were really affecting me in a good way. I was starting to wake up and realize, okay, now that we have a problem, I can finally identify the monster or the villain, the dragon that I need to slay. I know what it is now. It's the benzodiazepine. Now I can actually go into this battle with a fighting chance. Before that, I had no idea what it was I was fighting. And I was just throwing things at the wall, hoping it would stick, from, like I said, from the stem cells to the exosomes to, I even had neck surgery. I didn't mention that. I had several surgeons, several spine surgeons told me that if I didn't get surgery on my spine, I was going to be paralyzed for life. And they were telling me the neuropathy was coming from my cervical stenosis. And I had a few surgeons tell me, yes, they didn't agree. I had at least 3 or 4 surgeons agreed that it was the spinal stenosis causing my neuropathy. And then I had 3 or 4 other surgeons that disagreed and said, no, you have spinal stenosis, but it's not that bad, and it's in your neck, and that's not going to affect the nerves in your feet. after 3 years of no answers, because I wasn't going to let surgery be my first solution. After about 3 years of not finding any answers, out of desperation, I finally called the surgeon in Fort Lauderdale. The surgeon I felt the most was the most respectable, responsible, and highly rated surgeon in this industry. And I said, let's do it. And he cut me open, and he opened up my spine, and he created more space. They did a cervical laminoplasty, so they opened up the vertebrae and created more space for my nerve canal. Has it helped? I don't know. I don't think so. In fact, I now have neck pain where I never had neck pain before. My pain was everywhere else. Now I have pain in my neck as well. I think now I have a lot of muscle pain from the tension of coming. There's a whole nother pain that comes with getting off of the drugs, right? Because as you know, these drugs act like muscle relaxers. So I've been taking them for 20 years. And I've been out running around in jungles. I've been sleeping in some really harsh climates and harsh conditions and freezing cold in the deserts. And I always felt kind of limber and agile. And I was actually able to get up and work and carry around heavy equipment and cameras. And little did I know that a lot of that was probably coming from these muscle relaxers that were just allowing me to relax and get through the day. So until I tried getting off of them, and all my muscles started to tense up. And I started to lock up. My neck would lock up and my shoulder would lock up. I think all of that is a direct result of coming off of this 20-year use of these muscle relaxers.
Yeah. So bring us forward to, at any point, Tim, did you have a cold turkey or did you jump off too high a dose?
Yep. If we go back to, again, that kind of fateful day in New Jersey when I was having these intradose withdrawals, now I know what it was. At that time, I didn't really know what it was. I was having this horrible fit of rage, and the electricity and the jolts, the brain zaps and the jolts. And the brain zaps are really hard to understand, but it's almost like someone's hooking up a car battery, like the leads to your ears and just get jolted. I would get those periodically, and I was having them a lot this particular day. And I was having them so badly that out of desperation, I went in the other room and I grabbed the Xanax that I hadn't taken in a while. And I took a milligram of Xanax, and in about an hour, I was feeling wonderful. I went from being completely miserable and in excruciating pain where I could barely walk, and I was banging my fists on the table, just wanting the pain to stop, to dancing around the living room an hour later. And that was the moment I realized that, that must be what they call intradose withdrawal. Because now I just took the drug and I feel amazing. I even told my wife, I said, let's go dancing. And she's like, what are you talking about? An hour ago, you couldn't even walk. So that was my kind of experience. And you mentioned cold turkey. I kind of consider that was like cold turkey for a day. I must have not taken the Klonopin for a day or two. I think what had happened, now at this point, I wish I was keeping records back then. I keep records now since I started tapering. Back then, I think I switched from Ambien to another Z drug that was a different dose. And I probably didn't take the Klonopin for a day or two. And I was probably having kind of a cold turkey or a rapid withdrawal from not taking the Klonopin, that I was able to take a Xanax and feel wonderful. So that was the only time I really tried to cold. The other time I tried to cold turkey was cold turkey in Mexico off of everything else, but I didn't cold turkey off the benzo. The benzo was the one thing helping me keep it together.
Okay. And so bring us forward to now. What are you taking now? What's the dose and how are you tapering it?
I started tapering in August of last year. So it's been about 7 months. The first thing I had to do was I had to stabilize. And I realized that after reading the books, several books, I spent a lot of time on Benzo Free podcast. I think we should give a shout out to Dee Forster out there. His podcast probably helped save my life as well. I'm sure you're familiar with it. Your audience should be familiar with it. His voice, I was able to listen to him in bed every night when I was going through these withdrawals in Baltimore, and I was having trouble getting the medications. And he was so calming. His voice is calming, and his stories are calming, and his interviews and his guests. And I just, once I discovered that podcast, I was able to really kind of focus in. He helped me focus in on what was going on with me. And that's when I was going into the benzo help forums. And that's when I was realizing I wanted to taper. I wanted to get off of this stuff. And I was able to I found a tapering doctor in Philadelphia that was willing to work with me, that understood. I've actually found him through the benzodiazepine help forum or help website, the coalition. Mm-hmm. And I started the taper journey. And what I quickly realized before I even spoke to the psychiatrist about this was that I was kindling. I was taking the drugs as needed. I was taking the Ambien one day. I was taking the Klonopin the next day. And I would go maybe 2 days without taking either one of them because I was so exhausted I would just fall asleep. So I was all over the place. And as you know, that a lot of your audience probably don't know, I didn't know, these drugs have different dosages and different half-lives that make them act very differently. So, one drug may last for several days, like Valium has that long half-life. So you take a Valium and you might feel good for 2 or 3 days, whereas you take one of the Z drugs and you feel great for 4 hours and then you're bugging out again. So I realized I needed to figure out a way to stabilize. And the way to do that, I learned from the Aston Manual. This was all self-taught. I learned from the Aston Manual that I need to get over to Valium and start taking it every single day religiously, and then taper down from there. So that's what I did. I ended up switching over to Valium. I didn't switch immediately from Klonopin to Valium. I gradually, over the course of about 1 month, I switched from Klonopin to Valium, and I stabilized it. I stopped taking the Z drugs. I cold turkeyed off the Z drug. And that was really painful first couple of months, not taking the Z drug. And the doctors tried a few different things. The doctor in Philadelphia I was working with at the time, there were other drugs that were being prescribed to me by my doctors in New Jersey that I wasn't agreeing with. And I can't remember, like trazodone and a couple other ones they thought that would help me with the sleeping. And I think in hindsight, what I was realizing was the effects that I thought I was getting from the trazodone, the negative effects, were probably the side effects of coming off from the Z drug. Because cold turkeying off the Z drug is probably as bad, if not worse, than cold turkeying off the benzo. So I stopped taking the Z drugs immediately, and I was having horrible time sleep. I wasn't able to sleep at all, of course. So this doctor in Philadelphia put me on mirtazapine. And I was really reluctant to get on another drug because at this point I was pretty much getting the drugs out of my system. But he assured me, he said, listen, you really don't want to go through the pain of coming off of these Z drugs after 20 years without something that's going to help you be regular in your sleep. And he convinced me. And in hindsight, I'm glad. Now, I don't know what it's going to be like coming off of mirtazapine. Maybe you can tell me more about mirtazapine in a minute. But I am now taking 7.5 milligrams of mirtazapine at night for sleeping regularly. And I'm now down from, I started out my taper on 10 milligrams of Valium. This was after migrating from Klonopin to Valium. 10 milligrams of Valium. I'm now down to just under a milligram of Valium, 0.9 milligrams of Valium. And I did that by breaking and cutting pills. And now I'm shaving pills with a nail file. And it makes you feel more like an addict. Actually, you're shaving pills to try to get the right size. I haven't switched over to like a liquid taper. I don't know if it's, and then maybe this is something else you can answer for me as well. I'm not exactly sure where I should be. Should I, at this point, I'm at such a low dose of Valium. Should I just jump off at 0.9? Should I just try it and stop it? I mean, would you consider that cold turkey from here, or should I keep shaving them down should I go even lower?
You'll get to a point where you can't shave it precisely anymore, and then you'll have to go over to a liquid. Valium comes in, a manufactured version. I think there's 2 concentrations. I think it's like maybe 5 milligrams to 1 ml, but I also think they do 1 ml to 1 milligram. And so your doctor should be able to prescribe you this from a CVS or a Walgreens. But essentially, because you're at roughly 1 milligram now, you could probably get the 1 ml to 1 milligram version and make all of your reductions with a syringe. You could get a 1 ml syringe and then slowly kind of just looking at the increments, judge how much you're able to tolerate. You might, I don't know, maybe you'd take off 0.01 every, 14 days or something like that. And if you tolerate that, I would just ride that rate the whole way down to the end. I wouldn't jump, because, right at the end, even though you are on such a small dose of Valium, why mess things up? You've kind of come so far now, like just step off gradually and that might be, going down by 0.01 every 2 weeks or something like that. And that's 10 blocks of 2 weeks. And then potentially you're off. At least if you do it that way, if you find that symptoms start to rev up as you're going down, you'll catch yourself because you say, oh, this is not good. We're going to go back up and we're going to do it systematically.
Right.
So that should be pretty easy. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm pretty easy is famous words. Yeah. I thought that this would be easy. No, it's okay.
Yeah.
I really thought this was going to be easy. I thought I'm a tough guy. I've been through so much in my life. I can handle a stupid pill, boy, was I arrogant. I really, really was arrogant in the beginning, to think that this wasn't going to affect me in such a way. This is by far the most painful and difficult thing I've ever done in my life. And I don't say that lightly. Like I said, I've done some pretty crazy, I've documented some crazy things and I've lived in some really crazy environments. But I would never wish this kind of a pain and suffering on my worst enemy. It's torture. This is literally torture. And it's really hard to explain the pain, the torture. When people look at me and they think, oh, you're fine. And I went to visit my friends for Christmas. They would never suspect there's anything wrong with me, that I was lying in bed all day before I got there, and I was lying in bed all night after I got there because of the physical pain that I was going through, and I would just have to turn it off. I think Nicole Lamberson mentioned it in one of your videos, that you would have to just kind of turn it off. I have to turn it off when I go to the grocery store and just focus on appearing normal. And I would get through the grocery store, and of course, I'm a really social guy, and I have to force myself not to talk to people. And I'm now becoming this kind of like this hermitized soul. And but I would go into the grocery store, and someone would start talking to me. And normally, I'd be very talkative. I'd just start chatting, and I'm at a point where it's like I want that person to just go away. I don't want to talk to anybody. Here's an example. Just a couple of months ago, I was tapering, and during my taper, I'd cut my dose, and I was documenting my dose. I'm documenting in my journal. I have it right here in my journal that I document and I highly recommend people that if you're tapering, document everything. Document the pain level. I use like the CWA method. I don't know if you know this, the CWA charts for.
Sure. Yep.
Okay. There's like a benzo CWA B, I think they call it. So I kind of use that to measure my level of suffering and the pain, whether it's physical or mental. And I rate that, and I go through it in the book. And I've noticed that every time I do a cut, about 3 days after that cut is when the pain hits. And then it'll hit for about 3 or 4 days, and it'll start to mellow out. So I had done a cut, and then I was feeling really good for a couple of days. And I said to my wife, let's go to the beach. And we went to the beach, and when we got to the beach, and everything was fine. And so we sat down in the sands, and all of a sudden it hit. And The sunlight started ripping through my head, and it was like a searing bright light in my head. The waves, which were very gentle that day, sounded like trucks running through my ears. Everything was just intensified. The visual, the audio, and I ended up curling up in a ball in the sand with my hoodie over my head, and I was just in complete agony. And there was hardly anybody around. There were maybe 10 other people on the entire beach. It was a beautiful day, and I was miserable. And my poor wife was sitting next to me, not knowing what to do. And we had our dog with us, and this woman comes up and starts talking to my wife. And it sounded like the woman was shouting in my ear. And I peeked out of my hoodie. I looked out of my hoodie, and she was 12 feet away. And they were just having a casual conversation. But the noise was ripping through my head. And I was screaming, just go away, just go away. And she must have stood there for, it seemed like an hour, but it was probably only 10 minutes. And as soon as she left, I told my wife, I said, I got to get out of here. And I ran to the car, and I just sat in the car, and I put the hoodie over my head, and I took 2 Tylenol. And in about 15 minutes, the pain started to dissipate. But this started becoming common. This was the beginning of early in my taper, not the beginning. This was early in the taper. And as I was documenting this, I was realizing, okay, about 3 days after I cut my dose, I'm going to feel I'm going to be in a world of hurt. And I'm going to be in a world of hurt for 3 or 4 days. And it's going to start to mellow out. And then in about 2 weeks, I'll be able to do the neck cut. And I'm going to be in a world of hurt for 3 or 4 days. And then it's going to mellow out. So that's been kind of my system now. And now I can plan for it. I know that if I cut tomorrow in 3 days, it's going to hit me hard. I'm going to end up taking a bunch of Tylenol with codeine to kind of to bring the headaches down. But back to your original question. So now I'm on 1 milligram or just under 1 milligram of Valium and 7.5 milligrams of mirtazapine. I don't know as much about mirtazapine. You probably know more about it. And maybe you could tell me why it might be wise or not wise. And also, wise to use in conjunction with tapering, or why this doctor might have prescribed it. And I know what he told me, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on that as well, because I question it, and I wonder how long I should be on that, and at what point I'm going to need to taper off the mirtazapine, and how brutal that taper might be. I have no idea what to expect. He seems to think it's going to be easy compared to the benzo. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a lot there. So, generally with the mirtazapine, well, okay, where to begin here? So, in general, I don't usually recommend adding additional meds to cope with withdrawal symptoms, because you can end up, and this is probably what your gut was telling you and what you were worried about. You can end up in the same situation where you're dependent on it. Maybe it's not helping you and it's causing problems. That said, does that necessarily mean you're going to have an awful time coming off? No, it doesn't, because it means because there is a way to taper the mirtazapine, quite like you're doing with the Valium, where maybe it's not going to be so disruptive. So, what I would probably do with mirtazapine, and you work with this with your doctor, is just get the 7.5 turned into a liquid, and then just kind of gradually reduce it, or even do a micro taper if you don't want to do these sort of cut and holds with these, 3 days later you get hit with symptoms. We got a lot of videos on the channel just recently on how you would micro taper. And you might be able to just ride that one off very slowly, and it may not cause a lot. Your case is interesting, Tim, because and I want to go there because I really love your story, and one of the reasons why is because I would say it's not hugely less common, but it's maybe the less common version that we hear on the channel, and that is that a lot of our stories here are people that get railroaded into detox, something like that, and they cold turkey off. Maybe they've been on it for a couple of years, cold turkeyed off. They get hurt in one fell swoop. The severe withdrawal just causes the protracted withdrawal injury, the neurological damage, and that's it. Your story, I think, is much more confusing for other doctors and maybe other people because it's the subtle way that it develops over 20 years where instead of it being one huge withdrawal that damaged you, it's interdose withdrawal where, it's decades of kind of being on the drug at night and then going into withdrawal during the day and on the drug, and this compounded injury over time that eventually led to the neuropathy in your feet and the muscle, tightness and things like that. And it kind of built up gradually. You had this gradual protracted withdrawal injury that built up over time. And so I bring that into this because, that's just going to eventually heal. Like you're going to be off the Valium. You're not going to be going in and out of states of withdrawal. There's going to be some stability in your nervous system, and that will go away. People who have that kind of nervous system injury are a little bit more sensitive to withdrawal, and so that's where the mirtazapine comes in. And so as you gradually lower that one with your doctor, maybe you'll be a bit more sensitive to the mirtazapine withdrawal, but it's definitely not a foregone conclusion. You're going to have a terrible time, especially if you taper it slowly. And so how long have you been on mirtazapine?
Since the beginning of the taper. So it's been about 7 months.
Yeah, sure. So if let's say you finish off the Valium in the next, 4 or 5 months, something like that, maybe sooner, who knows? And then you would just you'd probably do the mirtazapine over roughly about a year, And so the amount of time you're on, you'd be roughly the amount of time you're off. And you would just say, okay, 7.5, what does it look like to come off that over a year? And that's generally the course that you try and stick to with your reduction schedule. And you just slow it down if you needed to. But I think, that's going to happen. There's still going to be the protracted withdrawal injury, though, from the nervous system dysregulation. That's just going to take time. And you may notice that gradually. In fact, you will notice that gradually it will improve because that's simply what happens in this. It just gradually gets better over time once you're not going in and out of withdrawal and it's aggravating you further. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I feel like it gets worse before it gets better. You may have heard that. I don't know if you've heard that from other patients or not, but the nerve, the pinches and the tingling and it's almost like I feel like certain nerves are waking up that have been asleep for 20 years. If that makes sense, maybe. So I do notice that after I cut, when I do the cut and hold method, after I cut, a few days later, like I said, all of a sudden the symptoms will come in these really huge waves. I'll start to notice new twitches, some new spasms, things that hadn't happened before. Or leg jerks that had gone away for a long time, suddenly back. And I feel like it's, sometimes I was explaining to like this to someone before. If you grow up in a cold climate and you've gone out in the cold all day long, you're playing in the snow as a kid or something, and your feet start to get numb. And if you're not wearing the best boots, at least when I was a kid, we didn't have the best boots. My feet would start getting numb and I'd come in and I'd try and thaw them out by the fireplace or with warm water. And your nerves that have gone numb are starting to wake up really quickly and painfully. And I'm sure some people in the audience have probably experienced that. As you actually feel sharp pinching and tingling in your toes and your heels as the nerves start to kind of reawaken. And I feel like that happens almost consistently each time I cut and hold. And the nerves start to wake up a little bit, and then it's a sensation that kind of comes and goes. And sometimes it feels like there's no rhyme or reason, and other times it feels like, okay, it's related to the cut I just did.
Yeah. So when you're working with something like a 2 milligram Valium pill, which you probably are if you're on about a milligram, you may be at the limits of what you can precisely reduce now with the scale, even with quite a precise one, and that's when you may consider going over to a liquid formulation or a compounded formulation. And if you get it diluted sufficiently, you can even do things like micro tapers, where let's say you get the, diluted into 6 ml or something like that, you can lower it by 0.01, and then you could essentially lower that amount every single day, and that would be a 5% reduction. And so that's one way you could do it. The rest of it, and you'd have less of those abrupt step downs where things would flare up. Although what you're doing, a lot of people have tapered that way with cut and hold. The micro taper might be a more gentle way, a less symptomatic way, but essentially probably what's happening is you've got this baseline neurological injury, which is gradually developed over time. And then whenever you do that little drop down, the injury may not be getting worse, but you've superimposed a mini withdrawal on top of it, which is kind of aggravating things and making things feel a little worse. So you could go either way. I mean, if you feel like you can work with a doctor and you want to do the liquids, you can. But if you feel like you can do it cut and hold to the end, I know a lot of people have had success that way. So it just gets a little fiddlier with the precision of working with the tablets when they get that small.
Right.
Yeah.
It's funny, when I was first researching the tapering, and I was first going through the Ashton manual, and I was seeing people on Facebook that were talking about liquid tapering and micro tapering, and I was like, I thought that's so extreme. I'm never going to have to go that extreme. I just break the pills in half and break them into quarters until I'm ready to jump. And I just thought it was going to be easy peasy. Again, I was really arrogant to the fact that it's just a pill, And then I read some conflicting information in the Ashton manual, and I realized the book is dated, but I know a lot of it is still very appropriate. I was reading some information. I'm pretty sure it was in the Ashton manual that liquid tapering can be. There is the thought that it just can be dragging it out, and I think she even mentioned it in the manual that it might be better to just suck it up and just get off, just jump, and just deal with the withdrawals. And I think she even said that in a book, just suck it up and jump. Now I don't know. I know I have some friends that I've built a community, not a community, but the benzo help forums on Facebook are a good place to build a small community of like-minded friends that you can rely on, you can talk to. So that was one thing, the good thing about that forum. I spent a lot of time in there, and I spent a lot of time asking questions and then responding to other people from what I've read. But I didn't ever feel like I was able to contribute to the help groups too much because I'm still going through the process. I haven't come out the other side yet. So I don't want to offer anybody bad advice. But I do have some friends that are now starting their liquid taper, and I have another friend who just jumped off of 0.5 milligram, and he said it's been really painful, but he's really happy he did it. So, I'm I know, and then you have to kind of work with people independently. And now I'm trying to figure out where I am. Or do I need to go the liquid taper method, or should I just bounce down and see what happens? That's a frightening place to be, though. It's a big decision, and it doesn't sound like much when you think about it. It's like, and so many people have told me, you mentioned detoxes. I was pushed, by several doctors and by friends. Why don't you just go to a detox? Do a 12-step program or whatever.
I know. Yeah.
No, that is the worst advice you could ever give somebody when it comes to the benzodiazepines. It's a frightening, and I realize that so many people on these help groups are petrified to jump off, and it sounds like they're jumping off a building. They're like, I'm afraid to jump. I'm like, you're on such a low dose. You're on like 0.01 milligrams. Just jump. And here I am. It's so easy for me to say, but now I'm getting
that's you. That's you now. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Now I'm where they are. I'm thinking, oh God, I'm petrified of this. What's going to happen? Because if I jump and it's not good, then do I have to reinstate? And the reinstate is a nightmare and it's not recommended. So yeah, I don't want to make a mistake. my one job in life right now is not to screw this up.
Yeah. And there's no, I mean, what I'll say is there's no rush. I don't think it's going to make you heal any faster or anything like that at this point. And right at the bottom is where things get risky. And I mean, at least what we know from your situation is you're feeling them. You know, it's not the reductions aren't benign for you. I mean, when you do them, they hit you. And what do we know? You know, there's something about being in withdrawal that can be damaging to the nervous system. And so coming off in a way where you don't have to kind of muscle through a couple of weeks of bad withdrawal and then wonder in the back of your head, hey, did I just like bruise my nervous system further?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to me, that tilts me in the way of like, keep on doing it the way you are, where you know you can handle it, or do it with a liquid if you need to, because you know, the whole thing's going to be over in a couple, you know, in half a year max, you know, something like that, or maybe longer, who knows. And
if you had told me 6 months ago that it was going to take 6 months, I would have said, you're crazy. I'll be off this in 2 months. And now I'm thinking, 12 months is probably the minimum, you know? Yeah.
And that's it. Although, you know, I've heard stories just like your friends. You know, I had one of my guys, severe protracted withdrawal injury, lots of burning in his feet, just eventually got it in his head. He was just like, I need to be off. And he came off really quickly, you know, quicker than we would advise, maybe like 30% every 30 days, like just finished it because he was just like, this is poisoning me. And we guided him and kind of checked in with him. He just came off the whole thing quickly. I mean, he still has protracted withdrawal injury, but it didn't get worse. But that said, you know, I've heard a lot of stories about people who jumped quickly and it took them to a whole nother level of hell. And then when they reinstated, they were just kindled, and then that went poorly. And then they tried to come off again, and the withdrawal was even more painful at that point.
I've heard those stories too, yeah.
It's like, so you don't know what's going to happen. And so you kind of, I mean, if you did decide to do liquid, what is that? Maybe 3 hours investment in your time trying to figure it out. And then it's kind of like brushing your teeth. It's just a thing that happens in the background. You may even decide that you want to do it for mirtazapine as well. And, you know, it's just syringes. It's a lot less time consuming than working with, you know, a razor and a precision scale and all of that. So
I don't even have a scale. I'm just doing it. I'm eyeballing it. So,
okay. Well, there you go. Yeah.
I spent so much. It's funny how it's like I've become a miser now, but I spent over $120,000 on my health. Yeah. But now I won't even spend $400 on a scale, on a precision scale, you know?
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to ask you, you had mentioned a while back that you're going to be licensed to work in Florida soon. Did that ever happen, or is that still in the works?
Still in the works. It's happening. Are you? Is that where you're based?
Well, I'm back in Florida. The reason I bring this up is I'm in Florida because the neuropathy is so bad. I can't wear shoes and socks, so I can only wear open-toed slippers and sandals. So you know, and people think that's crazy too, and it sounds crazy. It really does. It's like, what do you mean you can't wear shoes? I can't. I put shoes on and it feels like something's constricting me and electricity is just shooting through my feet. And I end up ripping them off my feet in 5 minutes. I was forced to put shoes on when I went up to DC for a funeral just a couple of months ago. And I ended up taking a whole bunch of Tylenol 3 to get through the day. And I realized I'm gonna need to stay in Florida for the winters. So luckily I have a base down here. I was in Florida for quite some time. And I'm asking you because I might want to get your, guidance or your work with me on the taper, on a liquid taper if I'm down here in Florida. I don't know if that's something you can do yet.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, check in with me in a month because it's probably not going to be that long. We'll announce it on social media as well once that happens, probably on the YouTube channel and the Twitter.
Or check with me. Yeah, definitely call me up because I do have a GP down here who understands. I already informed him of where I'm at and what I'm doing. So he's like, yeah, I'll work with whatever doctors you have. Just let me know where you're at and let, the doctors know to contact me. So luckily I have found, him. But another interesting story, or a little side note.
Well, wait, because I actually have to wrap soon, but I don't want to leave. Okay. I don't want to leave without asking you this. Give us your hacks for the tinnitus, because you brought that up earlier on, and we cannot leave the audience hanging on that. So I got to hear about that. Yeah,
the cliffhanger. Tell them that you guys will have to tune in to chapter 2. Stay tuned. No, it's a really simple one, and it probably won't work for everybody. But I tried so many different things, especially at night when I go to bed and it's too quiet. They're ringing in my ears. I can actually hear it now, but it's really bad when everything's gone quiet. Anybody who has tinnitus really badly knows that it'll keep you up. That constant buzzing and ringing in your ears. And I've tried all kinds of white noise. I'll put the ceiling fan on, and I just it dawned on me, because I really love camping and I love the outdoors. And it dawned on me when I was in Tennessee, and I opened the bedroom windows and I was listening to nature at night, and I was falling asleep very quickly, and I didn't hear the tinnitus so much. And I thought the tinnitus was going away, but it was actually the sound of the crickets outside. It was like the perfect frequency. And it blended right in with the tinnitus so well. And so I ended up finding a YouTube video on anybody. You just search YouTube for cricket sounds. And I found one that I like. You also find, running water and things like that. But the crickets I just found was the perfect frequency. It just matched my tinnitus perfectly. And I put it on every night before I go to bed now. And it helps immensely. So I hope it helps other people. I really do.
That's great. Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. We do have to wrap now. I just saw my next guest kind of pop into the room, but so I want to say, Tim, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. I think just having that firsthand account of what it's like when a protracted withdrawal injury develops gradually over time I think that's really going to resonate with a lot of people out there who don't see themselves in the rapid detox story. And there's a lot of people just like you. And so thank you. I mean, it's a really great story. It's interesting, but also
that I was just going to say, I'm really grateful for what you're doing. I think you're providing an amazing service to the community of people who might not even know that they have a problem yet. And I want people to not take this lightly. Do not let someone force you into a rapid detox clinic, because that, although I haven't been there myself, I can assure you it is not the way to go. You want to be in your home with your family. Hopefully you have a supporting wife like mine, who's been my godsend. I can't imagine going through all this alone. I can't even cook myself meals anymore. But don't take it lightly. Don't be arrogant and think that you're going to just jump off this pill. I have a friend who's taking a very high dose of clonazepam right now, and he thinks, I can jump off this anytime I want. I'm like, yeah, well, I'm saying to him what my friends were telling me 10 years ago. Good luck with that. Good luck. Well, 10 years ago, I had a friend tell me, you're on clonazepam. Good luck getting off of that. And I just kind of scoffed at her. I'm like, what are you talking about? This is going to be a piece of cake. But no, 10 years later, and I'm thinking, oh, wow, okay, I get it now. I really do. So, I hope this helps people realize I am starting to get my life back in very small increments. I actually went on a roller coaster. I'm a roller coaster lover. I went on a roller coaster at Disney last couple of weeks ago, and it was the best day I've had in 4 years. So there is hope. I'm getting my life back little by little. I really expect to be fully functioning again within a year, back to work, things like that. I also hope that people, when they take away from this, when you see people struggling with mental illness, one of the things I mentioned to you in the beginning before we started recording, I really want people to take a step back when you see somebody who's obviously suffering and don't just think, oh, that guy's mentally disabled. That guy's got a mental problem. I now look at things very differently. When I see someone struggling, pacing up and down on the street corner or something like that, has obviously got something going on. Or I see someone, just comes out in the news, another, high school killer or some shooter in a nightclub. I immediately ask myself, what drug is that person trying to get off of? Whereas CNN and all the news stations are all asking, what that guy's obviously mentally disabled. They always say that they're mentally disabled. He just came out of a detox facility, but they don't mention what he was detoxing from or what he was trying to get off of or what they've cold turkeyed him off of before he went ballistic. And the reason I can say that is because I actually found myself, gun shopping, 3 years ago, thinking I was going to take my own life. And I could see how easy it would be to take other lives with me. And this was the drug talking, not me. So I'm hoping that people can walk away from this and say, not just that person is sick, that person is demented, that person belongs behind bars, but that person could be on a drug or getting off of a drug that has affected that person in a really bad way and caused them to go quote unquote postal.
Yeah.
So
no, I think that's a great observation. And I'm just thinking, Tim, you ever thought about turning your camera on this topic? I'm sure you have. What does the future hold for you? Yeah.
I have thought about, I probably would have started making a documentary about myself. I thought about turning the camera on me and start making a documentary about myself and this journey. Luckily, I found several other documentaries were already made, and they're pretty good. And they're all on the Benzodiazepine Coalition website if anybody's interested in watching them. So I don't know that I have to put myself through the pain of making another documentary, although there can never be too many documentaries. I'm just not sure first of all, I don't know if I could handle it. Somebody would have to work with me probably and produce a documentary with me about me, because I don't think I could handle what it takes to be the filmmaker in the process at the moment. But I have considered it, and I think it's an important subject. But this is why I love what you're doing and what some of the others are doing, and some of the documentaries that are out there that I highly recommend. And we just need to raise awareness and stop putting people in these baskets of that person's mentally disabled or that person has a mental problem. Chances are it was a drug that caused that mental problem, or it was coming off of a drug that intensified that mental problem.
Yeah,
and
we don't see it.
Yeah.
But
this is what I think that the media needs to start asking these questions instead of just saying, "Oh, this guy went postal. It's a good thing he's dead. He hasn't killed anybody else." No, it's not a good thing that killer in Ohio is dead. That person's probably a victim, just like the victims in that case, or the victims of the killing. So we need to really start reevaluating, and I really think the media needs to take a better role in this.
Yeah, people don't want to ask those questions. That's a whole nother story for another time.
We could talk about why the media doesn't want to ask the questions, because the media is owned by the pharmaceutical industry. You and I both know that.
That's it. Yeah, that's where I was.
They can't. They can't ask the questions.
Yeah,
it's
Tim,
it's a shame, but yeah.
I want to thank you
one more
time.
Another guest in the waiting room.
Yes. So it's been awesome talking to you. I wish you the best with your recovery. We'll be in touch with the Florida license thing, and thank you so much.
Absolutely.
And I hope you have an enjoyable day. Okay.